There's a prison camp where kids have to dig holes. There's a treasure that's been missing for over 100 years. There are deadly lizards, criminals, and a scary prison warden. All coming up on the second episode of Bookwards. Hi, I'm Sam, an 11-year-old who reads a lot.
And I'm Dana, his mom, who also reads a lot.
Welcome to Bookwards, where we read and discuss the best kids' books. We encourage our listeners to read the book before listening, especially because there are always spoilers in our episodes. To make sure you never miss new episodes and always find out what we're reading next, follow us on Instagram and X at BookwardsPod.
So today we're discussing Holes by Louis Sachar. And to begin the discussion, I'm going to give a less than 60-second summary of the book. So there's a kid named Stanley Yelnats who's falsely convicted of stealing a pair of sneakers from a homeless shelter and gets sent instead of to prison to like a juvenile prison camp called Camp Green Lake. When he gets there, it's in the remote desert, and it turns out that all they do all day is have the boys who are the inmates dig holes in this dried up lake bed. And it's run by a series of counselors and a warden who are super mean. And eventually, Stanley makes friends with some of the other kids, ends up realizing that there's a lot more going on at Camp Green Lake. Basically, the prison warden is looking for buried treasure from like 100+ years ago that a very famous criminal called Kissin Kate Barlow, she thinks buried treasure, her loot that she used to steal from tons of people, in this lake bed. And so she's having all these inmates, these boys who are supposedly there to get better, to rehabilitate. She's just having them dig and dig and dig to try to find this treasure for her. So Sam, tell me about the book. What'd you think?
I've read this book many times, and each time I keep thinking about how all these characters are all connected. Like Zero is Zeroni from Madame Zeroni, her great-great-great-grandson, and Stanley is Stanley Yelnats' great-great-grandson.
Yeah, there's these really interesting flashbacks that we get of things that happened 100 years before. So it turns out that Stanley goes to Camp Green Lake, but we hear about his ancestor, Stanley Yelnats. We don't really understand when we're reading why this is like at all relevant, but it all comes full circle at the end of the book when it turns out that Stanley is Stanley Yelnats' great-great-great-grandson, and Zero is Madame Zeroni's great-great-great-great-grandson, and Stanley actually carries Zero up this mountain by Camp Green Lake to save him, and they drink from a stream. And all of a sudden the curse is broken, and the next day they find this hidden buried treasure. So we keep going back and forth between the past and the present, which is very cool because it does come full circle.
There are a lot of, Stanley's not the only character really in this book. There are a lot of other kids at Camp Green Lake. And the ones I want to target right now are X-Ray and Zero. Do you have any thoughts on those two?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the writing in this book is really good. And you feel terrified when Stanley shows up at Camp Green Lake. Like, he shows up at this remote in the desert prison camp. He's handed a shovel, 2 pairs of pajamas, or 2 pairs of clothing, rather. And he's told, like, okay, wake up's 4:30. You eat a tiny breakfast, and then you have to go dig holes all day. And it's, like, pretty terrifying. And he's in a cell block with, like, something like 12 other boys, and we get to know the other boys. Zero is one who's the fastest digger, so he's the best hole digger in their group. But he's also silent, and they all think that he's stupid. Like, I think he can barely talk, and that he doesn't understand anything, doesn't know anything. They think he's, like, very slow. And especially, what's really interesting is the counselor, Mr. Podansky, who seems like a really nice guy. Like, we get glimpses of him being really nice to all the boys, but he's very obnoxious to Zero. Like, he says things like, oh, and Zero's like a moron. He doesn't know anything.
And that is one of the mysteries that at the end of the book we actually never solve. Why Mr. Podansky hated Zero so much.
Right, like Mr. Sir and the warden are just kind of evil throughout and bad to everyone, but Mr. Podansky, at first you think he's a nice guy, but then you see him being horrible to Zero, saying really mean things about Zero, and then at the end you see that he's a bad guy because he's like pointing a gun at Stanley by the end. So you know he's bad. But it's weird to have a villain like that who's you actually think is really nice. He seems nice, and he's actually nice to the boys sometimes. But then his evil nature comes out.
So actually, I think that's actually was going into what I was about to say, because I think the warden is a very interesting villain. Because usually with these villains in books, what you see is they seem like nice people, like throughout the book. Like there are not a lot of villains where they don't seem like nice people throughout either like the book. And then at the end you find out that they're not nice people. The warden we saw throughout the book, she was same thing with Mr. Sir. He throughout the book was just mean. But Mr. Pendansky, he was one of those normal villains that I think we see a lot in books, where he seemed nice, and then we found out he was a villain.
Well, we could talk about Stanley's crime for a minute, because I think one of the coolest parts of the book is how everything fits together. There's all these really cool parts of the plot that fit together so nicely. So you have Stanley, and you have the history of his great-great-grandfather, Elia Yelnats, and Madame Zeroni, which we talked about before. Then you have Stanley's own father, Stanley Yelnats, who's an inventor who's trying to make find a way to recycle old sneakers. So he's like a sneaker inventor. But then we get the whole history of Camp Green Lake and Kate Barlow, who becomes the criminal.
So Kate Barlow, she actually has a very cool story.
Also tragic.
Tragic, but it's pretty cool. So she runs a very broken schoolhouse in Camp Green.
We're like 100 years ago. Camp Green Lake is a lake, and it's like a flourishing town.
It's a great town. So she is the teacher, the only teacher of this small, broken down, old schoolhouse. But she's very pretty, so a lot of people come just to see her face. Just instead of to learn.
Right, they come to school because it's a pretty teacher, not because they necessarily want to learn.
One of those kids is Trout Walker, who ends up being the villain of this story. Holes is actually made up of many different stories. Like it's made up of 3 different stories. Elia Yelnats, Stanley Yelnats, and right now what we're talking about, Catherine Barlow. So in this story, Trout Walker is actually the villain. So another big main character in this story is Sam, who sells he's like a doctor, but instead of selling medicine, he sells onions. He's
not a doctor, he's an onion seller, but he uses onions to treat all kinds of ailments.
And when someone gets sick in the town, and they'll go to a Doc Hathorn, and Sam. They'll go to Sam too, just to get his onion ointments.
So this plot, I love this book because the plot is so intricate, but so cleanly written, and everything fits together like perfect puzzle pieces. The story of from way back when, the original story of Elia Yelnats and Madame Zeroni, then the story a couple of generations later of Stanley Yelnats and Kissing Kate Barlow, and then the story the present story of Stanley Yelnats and Zero at Camp Green Lake.
Right.
So tell me about the friendship between Stanley and Zero.
So I think for maybe even more than half this book, there is no friendship between Stanley and Zero. Stanley sees Zero, maybe not as the other boys see him, but he thinks Zero is just a stupid kid that's good at digging holes.
But then Zero asks him to teach him to read. So they form a bond.
So first Stanley actually says no. But then he notices that when there is an incident where Stanley gets blamed for stealing Mr. Sir's sunflower seeds, which he didn't do. He gets blamed for it.
Well, no, he takes the hit for it. He actually...
He
says, I did it because when you're in a
right.
prison setting, if you can't rat out other people, so...
Right. So he takes the hit for it, and then while he was in the warden's office with Mr. Sir, Zero actually digs his hole for him. And when he starts seeing how nice Zero actually is, that's when this friendship starts to begin.
Yeah, so we see a lot of cool growth in Stanley. We know that Stanley is a very overweight kid in school, doesn't have a lot of friends, gets picked on. Then he comes to Camp Green Lake and he really toughens up. Like, he has to do physical hard labor. He teaches Zero how to read. He takes the hit for stealing Mr. Sir's sunflower seeds, which he didn't do, but he kind of understands how to navigate dealing with the other boys at Camp Green Lake.
When you're not like, it's easier to go to Camp Green Lake when you are a criminal, because that means, like, you're already, like, you've already done bad stuff. You're already, like...
Tough?
Tough. Yeah, like, tough.
Right, he's not, but he figures out how to, like, get by.
How to live.
He also gets a lot stronger physically.
Right.
So you see...
Loses a lot of pounds.
Yeah.
Less overweight.
Yeah, but figures out how to deal with all the other kids. He grows a lot as a character. Going back to the 3 stories, though, which is your favorite of the 3? Because there really are 3 different things going on here. So you have the original Elia Madame Zeroni story. You have Stanley Yelnats.
My favorite would have to be the one about kissing Kate Barlow, because that one stood out to me. That one was like, I thought it was funny, because there were a lot of funny characters, and it's like, this is from 100 years ago. Like, you see stuff in these stories that you're not going to see today.
Like what?
Like someone selling, like, onions, like, these days.
Raw onions?
Yeah, you can't, like, go around and find someone selling onions.
You go to the grocery store.
Right, at the grocery store, you don't go find someone selling onions. Like, you're never going to see that. And, like... It's funny how, like, Trout Walker in school, in the story, was boasting about having a boat that runs on a small boat that runs on an engine, because back then that was like the boat to
Well, that was new.
Right, that was new.
I actually like the original Elia Yelnats Madame Zeroni story, because I like the ending of it, which is Elia Yelnats goes to all this trouble to bring the pig up the mountain every day to drink from the stream to get big so that he could win this girl's hand in marriage. And he was like 20 or something. This girl was like 15.
He was 15 too.
Okay. Oh, they were both 15. Fine. And then the other guy who wanted to marry her was like, what, 50 or something? 57. And then in the end, and he was like, of course, you know, it made it seem like her terrible dad might actually allow her to marry a 57-year-old instead of a boy who's her age. But then... when both pigs are weighed and they weigh equal, the dad said, fine, I'll get a pig of equal size, so I don't care which guy it is, so who do you want to marry? To the girl? And she was like, I don't know. Like, she was totally, she's like, I don't know. Like, maybe I'll marry the 57-year-old, maybe I'll marry Elia. Like, she totally didn't care, which was very unexpected. Like, you kind of thought you were reading a story.
That's another thing to show the times.
Like, well, yeah, 15-year-olds getting married.
Right, 15-year-olds getting married and not caring who you marry.
Right.
It's not happening.
What was your favorite scene in the book?
My favorite part was probably at the end when they were sitting in Stanley's big house, now that they have a lot of money. Him, Clyde Livingston, the one who
the baseball player,
stole his shoes from, and Zero are sitting in Stanley's house watching the Super Bowl, and there's all this type of fancy stuff. And then, like, there's a commercial with the sploosh, which is the spiced peaches from the desert. Mm-hmm. And I find that just a very funny scene.
I know, like, all came full circle.
Yeah,
Clyde Livingston, you have...
Yeah, we all fought, like, all the pieces
all the pieces come together. You have Stanley Yelnats and Zero as the great grandkids of Elia Yelnats and Madame Zeroni sitting there. They had found sploosh, which was Kate Barlow's peaches. Now the product for making feet smell nice that Stanley's dad invented is called sploosh, and it makes your feet smell like peaches.
So
it is good, and they're all rich. It's great.
So what about you? Were there any scenes that you thought were like your favorites?
I like all scenes with the warden because she's just
a funny, mean, cruel character.
Yeah, you're like waiting for what she's gonna do. She's very cruel.
And last episode, you like
Ivory.
Yeah, like
from
no,
Unplugged.
you were like the villain. Like you were like.
Yeah, so I like scenes with the warden.
The villain.
But I also really
like the villain.
I like the friendship that clearly developed between Stanley and Zero. So at the end, like the last couple chapters of the book are Stanley runs away from Camp Green Lake to find Zero, who first runs away from Camp Green Lake and has to. And they go through this whole kind of like epic trek through the desert, up a mountain. Stanley carries Zero for part of it. But they're very attuned to each other's feelings. Like, they only want to drink when the other one drinks. They really take care of each other. I really like the friendship that developed between them. And on the way, it turns out Zero's actually, like, something of a math genius. And also learns how to read really well and is actually very smart. Do you believe in curses? Like the Stanley Yelnats family curse?
Do I believe in? No.
You do not.
I think that's a...
So you're like Stanley's mom.
That's in literature. That's in the book. In the book, I think the curse is real. I don't think they're like...
And so do you believe it was really broken when Stanley carries Zero up the mountain? Because
I think, judging by, like, they had a lot of good luck within the next couple of weeks, yes, I think Louis Sachar was trying to show us that there was actually, like, a curse.
Definitely, if you make a commitment to doing something, you should do it. If you tell somebody you're going to do something, like Elia Yelnats told Madame Zeroni that he would carry her up a mountain, and especially if you take something from someone and it's a bargain, right? It's an exchange for something you commit to doing, then you should really keep your word. But also, what ultimately breaks it is Stanley being a really good friend to Zero. Like, carrying him, they were both weak, exhausted, super thirsty in a desert, like almost on the brink of death. And he nonetheless carries Zero up that mountain. Like, he becomes a really loyal friend and puts himself at risk for Zero, carrying him up the mountain. He had no idea he was, like, doing anything other than being a really good friend and caring for him. And ultimately that broke the curse. So I think there's a really nice lesson about friendship and taking care of the people around you, the friends around you, and helping when you can. Like, when he decided that he was going to teach Zero to read, like, if you're in a position to do something for somebody else, it could be life-changing for them. So even though, it was after a long day of digging holes, the last thing he wants to do is teach somebody how to read, but he decides to do it, and that starts this friendship that ultimately breaks his curse.
If you could change this book in any way, how would you change it at all? And if so, how would you change it?
I actually wouldn't. I really, really love this book. I think it's a great book.
There's no characters. There's nothing you would change.
No.
Then I'll tell you something I would change.
Yeah.
I would maybe change... I would have loved if Mr. Sir was, like, also fit into the puzzle somehow. Like, with the Warden, Stanley, Zero, all these characters that were all, like, little puzzle pieces to a
right, like their connection
story.
went back hundreds of years.
Right. I thought it would have been cool if Mr. Sir would have been one of those Also, there are a bunch of mysteries that we never solved about this book. I would have liked to know the answer.
Like what?
Why Mr. Pendansky hated Zero so much.
Yeah.
What Mr. Sir's actual name was.
Yeah. So in every episode, we give the book that we read a rating. So Sam, how would you rate Holes by Louis Sachar?
Out of 10, I'm going to rate this book an 8.7.
Okay. That's higher than you gave Unplugged by Gordon Corman last week, which was 8.5.
I think Holes is a little bit of a better book.
Okay, I'm going to give it a 9.4, which brings the total rating to an 18.1. And let's now give out the Bookwards Book Awards. So we do this thing where we go through 5 different categories and rate the best book that we've read so far in all these 5 categories. So far, Unplugged by Gordon Corbin is winning in every category because it's the only book we've read. Well, so now let's see if Holes...
It changes.
Let's see if it changes.
And where it changes.
So, best main character. So far, it's Jet from Unplugged. What do you think? Stanley better than Jet?
Is Stanley better than Jet? That is a tough one. I don't know. So, Stanley is a really, really good main character, though. I think I do like Stanley better than Jet. Just because, but that might just because we see Stanley, like for Stanley, we see like his opinion the entire book. Jet, if you remember Unplugged, see a lot of people's opinions. Like maybe if
point of view, yeah.
Yeah, if we stuck with Jet the entire book, I would have liked Jet better. But
so you're going with Stanley.
I'm going with Stanley.
Okay, I hear that. Stanley is definitely a much more likable character. Jet I find very entertaining in Unplugged, but he's not that likable. He's kind of a jerk.
Right.
So we're going to go with Stanley Yelnats for best main character. Best supporting character.
Supporting character, the one I'm going to use from Holes is Zero, because I think he is the main supporting character.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I like Zero better than Brooklyn.
From Unplugged.
Just because. So the funny thing about both these supporting characters, Brooklyn and Zero, is that we don't see them for the first half of the book. Like, they're not in the first half of the book. Really.
That much.
Not that much. They're not really in it. So they both have a small, limited amount of time to like be a good supporting character. And I think like Brooklyn is just a little more entertaining. Zero, even for the second half, even for most of the second half of the book, he was a little like boring.
Okay, the better setting. They're both camps, which is interesting. You have the Oasis, which is a wellness camp, and you have Camp Green Lake, which is a juvenile prison camp. Which one is more interesting?
So I think Camp Green Lake.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think
Camp Green Lake is nuts. Okay, best plot twist. In Unplugged, it was the alligator farm. We won't say more in case you haven't read Unplugged. Go back and read it and then listen to episode 1 of ours. But the plot twists here, I don't even know what we would point to as the plot twist. There were so many in this book. This book was like one giant plot twist, which is what I loved about it.
Well, the thing is, though, we could have said that about Unplugged too, but we didn't. So I think we should probably pick one plot twist. And I'm going to narrow it down to final 2 and let you pick one of the final 2 options.
Okay.
So I think the 2 main plot twists are that the warden is actually looking for Kissing Kate Barlow's treasure, and that Zero was the only one that really stole Clyde's sneakers. Which one do you think is a better plot twist?
So I think it's that the warden is looking for Kissing Kate Barlow's treasure, because that ties everything together. It's like brings the current Stanley Yelnats back to the grandfather Stanley Yelnats, who was robbed by Kissing Kate Barlow at Camp Green Lake, because she was an outlaw, and now he's here digging holes to find this treasure because the warden of this prison camp, is the child of Trout Walker. Like, it all comes full circle. So I think that's the plot twist. But is it better than the alligator farm?
What do you think?
I think no. Nothing's better than an alligator farm.
Yeah, that alligator farm's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Okay, best villain. We have Ivory from Unplugged. Or, at first we have to pick a main villain from this book. Probably the warden.
Yeah, I would say it's the warden.
Okay.
I would say it's the warden.
So who's the better villain?
I would say the warden.
Yeah? I would say Ivory, just because we get to know her more. The warden here, we don't really get to see that much.
Ivory, do we get to know her more?
Oh, well, we see the warden put on that poisonous lipstick, or nail polish, poisonous nail polish.
She's like...
And scratch the face
cool
of Miss...
stuff.
Yeah, fine, she is cool.
Yeah, she's like pretty cool, the warden.
I mean, in an evil way.
In an evil way, but like, I think I go with the warden.
Okay, fine. We're going with the warden. Okay. Best villain, the warden.
Holes overtook Unplugged on 3 of the 5 categories.
Nice. Well, we'll see what happens next time. So next time on Bookwords, we're going to be reading Spy School by Stuart Gibbs. And we hope you'll join us, read the book, and then listen to our discussion of it.
So don't forget to follow us on @BookwordsPod on Instagram and X to stay updated and share your thoughts on the book. And you can always give us book recommendations. We're happy to hear them.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to Bookwords, and we'll see you next time.